Okay, thank you everybody for coming. This is we are very glad to have a number of distinguished scholars in eye tracking and later on EEG on campus to come and give us talk on their research. Very fascinating research. I looked at their slides earlier and I just couldn't wait to listen to their talk and for them to share their research. So I do have a very brief introduction and I make it as brief as possible because we have so many good stuff, in this seminar. So this is a computational research seminar using physiological measures in behavioral and communication sciences, the use of eye tracking and EEG. So we have the part 1 and the part 2. Part 1 is from 2:30 to 3:45, and then we have a 15 minutes break, and then we'll continue at 4 o'clock on EEG. So I'm the moderator, Fiona. So first, I will introduce our 4 panelists for the eye tracking part 1 session. We have Professor Chun-Yi Kit over there. He is in the Linguistic Department of Linguistics and Translation. And then we have Professor Anthony Chan over there. He's in Department of Computer Science. And we have Dr. Danny Young over here. And she's in the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences. And then we have Dr. Xiaowei Luo, who is in the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering. So you see eye tracking research across a variety of areas. It has so many applications out there. And I also constantly attend the webinars by Toby and iMotion. So I've also seen a lot of eye tracking research, and especially for those in marketing when it comes to communication and maybe business in the marketing area, there's also a lot of use of eye tracking research. So I'm just going to kind of briefly mention some of the research that I've done. One of them is in users' reception of product recommendations. So we look at eye tracking, when they're looking at product recommendations and how they behave differently when recommendations are given at different part of the e-commerce session. So some were given earlier, some were given later, some were given in the middle. And in fact, I started similar kind of research even before I heard about eye tracking, where we look at how people actually look at attributes, like e-commerce attributes and products and how they make decisions. But at that time, we use something like a spreadsheet where you have to click to open it up. And then once you click on another cell, that cell will close. So in that sense, you actually track where the people are looking at. But certainly eye tracking is so much better because it's more natural compared to how I use it in the long past. And then another research that I have looked at, I actually have an experiment plan. And this was still when I was still in the United States, in Missouri. So we actually have an experiment plan to examine eye tracking metrics for sleepiness. We have done a fairly comprehensive review of the different kind of metrics, but then pandemic came and then we paused. So it's still paused, and now I'm in Hong Kong and I'll see if there's opportunity for me to continue looking at sleepiness. And I see that Professor Kidd has something quite similar on mental fatigue, overload, which has actually a lot of similarity with sleepiness. And then this is just a little bit, I'm jumping kind of to EEG now. And we have a few professors who actually have committee meetings and even college meetings at this time. And some of them could only come in later part to join the EEG. And for EEG, one of the research that I've done that I really thoroughly enjoy, this is probably the most passionate research that I've done, where I look at the state of boredom, flow, and anxiety. And I put EEG headset on users, and it's a within subject experimental design, where users would first be shown the resting state, looking at stationary across, and then we kind of detect, their brain activity. And then we gave them a level 1 where it's really boring. They couldn't click on the mouse because we disabled the mouse. So they just have to keep staring at the screen for each block to drop. And then we then move on to a higher level where we let them play for quite a while. And at some point, they develop the flow state, which is the state where they are completely immersed and thoroughly enjoying the experience. And then later on, we gave them a very high stage where I couldn't even play it myself, level 15 and level 20, anxiety. Basically, all I see is just blocks dropping. Although we do have some subjects who were actually able to manage, I was really impressed. So we actually had two levels, level 15 and level 20, because some people who could manage level 15, we want to make sure we have a more challenging level to look at. And as for how we detect whether they actually were bored, or maybe boredom is hard, we just assume they were bored because it was truly boring. However, how we detect whether they were in flow, or at least in deduce, or try to infer whether they were in flow and anxiety is based on a retrospective process tracing. We recorded everything, and then we played the entire gameplay to the subject and kept asking them, how do you feel at this point? And then we have a piece of paper that shows different states, and do you feel any of this? So we make sure we do not mention any of these words to avoid biases, but we basically just keep asking them, how do you feel? And then do you feel any, if they say they feel flow, then we say, let us know if you don't feel flow anymore. So that's how we kind of specifically try to figure out which segment in the EEG should we use to correspond best to the flow and anxiety. So that's one of the challenge in the research, but I think that's the best way we could deal with it in terms of retrospective process tracing and have them kind of verbalize. Of course, we have some subjects who never play games or hardly play games that say, I just never get into flow. Then obviously that data point is not useful. So this is one of the research that I've done. Very, very interesting research. And with that, I want to thank everyone for your interest and also for participating in the roundtable. I know we have a lot of people online because, so because the session goes all the way to 5:45 and some of them have to move in and out. So they said Zoom would provide that flexibility. And with that, we are going to begin to hear all the fascinating work by our panelists. So here we have all the different files. We have all the different files on the computer. So I guess our panelists can just open the corresponding one. And then we will make sure we put it back on share screen, right? Okay, thank you. I think we'll call upon our first speaker, Professor Keith Chun-Yi. I think yours is a CMC, is that right? I think, let me see. Oh, this one. Oh, it's all well, it's all named properly already. Okay, let me try to make everything come through properly. I have to share screen. Make sure. Oh, is it? Let's do it. Okay, let's do that. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, for inviting. Thank you. And because everyone has a mask on, I thought Anthony. Okay, so I will give a very short overview on our case. Okay, I can do it. Okay. Thank you. I'll give a very brief overview on our eye tracking work to study translation and Chinese reading in our department. Our department is in the name of linguistics and translation. Right? So we have a language conditioning lab. We have both eye trackers and EEG machine. So we just have a new one. That's a very basic things we need to have. And I have done some basic things on two directions. One is to work in the direction of human-machine interactive translation, but we have just started. I want to take this as a special case of human-computer interaction. So now I'll focus on, look into how a translator spend his or her attention or cognitive effort onto those basic translations of tasks. For example, you have to read, right? You have to write, you may need to look up something in a dictionary. And after collecting the data, we want to build a cognitive model of translation, for example, following some basic theories like the microcycle theory, but we haven't arrived at that so far yet. The second part is on Chinese reading. In order to do this, we need to, figure out the basic settings for the environment for reading. So our first part is on typological settings. We need to, set the base, the font size, right? And then spacing between characters. Spacing in Chinese, we do not have spaces between words, right? If we add something as a space for words, what will happen? And also even line spacing also may be a very critical factor to our reading performance too. And when we go into the part of reading, you need to collect a lot of data. Of course, there's different ways to do it. One is to have some controlled design of experiments. Another way is what we are doing. We want to just let the subjects to read a lot of sentences, a lot of passages, and then we collect everything. And then we do, we hope to have some interesting or meaningful observation on the behaviors of reading, instead of take some hypothesis in terms of the using some kind of control design. And with this goal in mind, we have developed probably the largest Chinese reading corpus of eye movement, around 3 million read characters. So let me go through this several experiments we have done. The first one is to text, to actually have some rough estimation of our translators' cognitive effort allocation to the several translations of tasks. So the interface is very simple. We have a text box for source text input, and then the translator will write down their Chinese translation in the target text box. And we also provide a very simple bilingual dictionary. And then we just collect their fixations and sarcasms, right? And then we move on to analyze the workload allocation, attention allocation. So because of time limit, I think I can only present the very rough results here. So you can see that a translator spend most efforts on writing down their translation in the TT target text box. And then the second, they also need to spend a lot of time to do reading. And we have two tests, one easy, one difficult. Right? You can see the easier ones is in what kind of orange color. Right? And then you see the reading for the easier ones save a lot of time. At least its translator does not spend as much time as that for the more difficult ones. And sometimes the translators may have to take care of two things when they are reading and typing, to do it in parallel. So they have parallel attention, but that part is very small in terms of the effort. Right? And if you take a look into the workload intensity, that means the workload for each fixation, you see there's not that much difference as the total workload. But we still can observe that the intensity for target text composition and parallel attention is quite similar. They are both bigger than the efforts needed for reading and for dictionary lookup. Dictionary lookup basically just search for something. But I have a conjecture that dictionary, dictionary lookup, or the way of using a dictionary for reading and for writing should be different. But we have not got any evidence show this difference yet. So this is a very interesting topic we are going to do later. And then for the reading, we do some text on the type of, we want to find out the optimal setting for reading. So first we do some testing. For example, how bright the the luminous contrast of the foreground background. And we got some results, but not that good yet. So basically, if you set the contrast too low, it's no good. So we have a range in here. Basically, this range should be okay. So we observe very little difference in this range. That means the ratio, luminous contrast ratio from 2.5 to 1 to 5.5 to 1. Around this is okay. If you have too low luminous contrast in here, you got longer fixations. That means you need to spend more time for getting information for words. And then you have longer overall reading time. That means poor, worse performance. And for the word spacing, you know, we do not have word spacing in Chinese. We add word space in it, it does not help. Okay, it helps on reading individual words. So for each individual words, reading is faster, but the overall reading time gets longer. Why? Because we spend time. Okay, we have a lot of fixations on those spaces. If you have larger space, more fixations. This explains why adding word spaces does not really help on the overall performance. But I think we still need some more closer look into this issue. It's not only about, spending time or having some more fixations spent on those spaces. It may also relate it to some other factors too. So the result is this: we get better on reading individual words, but the overall reading time increases. And for character spacing, you may have, in Chinese text, each character is a square actually. Between every two squares, you have a tiny space. If you can enlarge it, and you can get smaller inter-character space. So the result is that if you get larger character spacing, that means you got longer reading time. For the same reason, you have more fixations on spaces. And if we increase, we text the character size in terms of the angles, and then the result is that the worst case is different from the best case. But we have 5 conditions here. The other 4 we cannot observe any significant difference from them. So we believe that except the worst case is no good for us to use others, we do not see any difference. So you guess probably the best one would be somewhere here, 0.7 to 0.8 as our guess. So for our reading corpus development, we fix our character size to 0.8. And we have a lot of experiments, and therefore spacing for luminous contrast testing. And in those experiments, we collected those reading data using no spacing. No space, that means use a natural unspaced Chinese text with a character size in this range. You collect them as our data for our corpus. And we also do two other reading for data collection. One is to read sentences, 300 sentences by almost 100 participants. Excluding some invalid one, we have 98. So 2 parts for the this part of reading, sentences and passages. So we sum up all valid data from all our experiments so far. We got 2,000,000.7 some 700,000 read characters. And using this kind of large-scale data, we have some interesting results. As I mentioned, if we can have data from control experiments, basically we want to do experiments to test some hypotheses. So now we are trying to take another approach to collect data from free reading. with optimal topographic setting, we have found, right? So we want to arrive some interesting observations from large-scale data. Because we have got a lot of findings in the past through control experiments. So the first thing we want to find whether we can, see those effects. So we are going to examine several effects. One is several very well-known effects. One is frequency effect, another another visual complexity. I do not see. I think probably we are the first one to do it, right? And I'll show you some result later. Okay? And this one is very interesting. For Chinese reading, the preferred viewing location effect is not certain in the reading of the Western languages. We have the preferred viewing location slightly to the left of the middle of a word. But in Chinese reading studies so far, we have not confirmed this yet. But based on our data, I think we got it. Chinese does have PVL in reading. That's a big finding, through our corpus development. Okay, so let's take a look at here, right? So that's the data. I'm not going to go into the data analysis part. We do it through scaling. So for the visual complexity, we have several ways to estimate the visual complexity. Some Chinese characters only one stroke, like one, right? Some have the classified good. And we have only 3 strokes in supervised Chinese, but there are a lot in the classical unsupervised Chinese. Right? So we can calculate the visual complexity of a word in terms of the length, but I don't think this is really meaningful as calculating number of characters as length for English words. Right? So I recall that the average word length for Chinese is 1.8 something. 1.8 something. So the majority of Chinese words are of 2 characters. In our corpus, we have 1 character, 2, 3, 4 character words. So in terms of the length, we do observe the effect. In terms of number of strokes, we also observe the visual complexity. But if you use a grayscale, in terms of pixels on the each area of Chinese character, we cannot see it. We cannot see it, this part. So this is a very interesting thing. We are still trying to understand it. Why? Right? Probably, I don't know, something very interesting here. That means the grayscale of average grayscale on individual characters may not be a sound indicator for visual complexity for Chinese. I'm not sure. So we are now spending time on several issues we do not really understand yet. And yes, if we take a closer look at this part in terms of the, looking into the visual complexity effect in terms of the number of strokes of each word, you see it on the whole word, we do have it. On the single first character, we have it. On the second character, we have it. But another thing we do not understand is that the trend of the whole word and the second character is, opposite to each other. Why? I don't. That's something we still need to spend more time to look into the details. And for the frequency effects, yes, we do have it on the whole words, on the first character, on the second character. Right. So that's the result we have got it recently. And next, we are going. We have data to show the PVL, preferred viewing location, but we still need to go into some more detail. So that's some part of our works. And next, because the time is short and rush a little bit too much. It's okay. So next, we want to do is to have some studies on the Sakar targeting or Sakar control in Chinese reading. Why we want to do this? Because it's very interesting. the reading of Chinese and the Western language, like English, they share some similar patterns in terms of fixation. It's about where we want to, when we are going to move our eyes, okay. That means fixation is the time period for us to perceive information from our text. And then we move our eyes to the next word, right? But we see a sharp difference of the reading of Chinese and other language in terms of this Sakha targeting and Sakha control. So we guess probably it's because there's no word spacing in Chinese. And then, reading, okay, when you fixate on somewhere, you get information from your fovea area. But in the parafovea, the surrounding area, you see something not that clear. Right? But when you're reading English text, you see the word boundary in the parafovea area quite clearly. Right? Even from a large angle, you can still get some certain information. But for Chinese, I think preview effect is very weak, very weak. There is a conclusion that we cannot preview the next word's boundary. But from our data, it looks like probably you can see something, not that clear. We can predict something for the boundary of next words. So I think probably the preview effect may probably play a key word in here. So next, we want to look into this issue through some control design. You have a target words, right? When you fixate on this one, how the next word is going to affect your targeting, something like that. So we are going to examine a series of factors. I think probably those factors or character properties of word property in Chinese may play the key roles to cause this kind of difference in Sakha targeting between Chinese and Western languages. Right? So we are going to look into visual complexity again, and in character properties, like in Chinese character, we have radicals, strokes, right? Some radicals represent some sounds, some radicals represent some meaning. So we want to look into which part would play a more important or more significant roles in the, on the Sakha targeting. And also word property a lot, like frequency, length, and even part of speech and somatic characteristics, like some words are more opaque or some are more transparent, something like that. And even text heterogeneity may also play a role. For example, numbers, Chinese number and Arabic number digits in Chinese text may cause different kind of reading behavior. And the low words and transliteration, a lot of unique things in Chinese text. Okay, so I just give you a very brief introduction to what we have done so far. Thank you.
Thank you. This is fascinating. Learn so much from here, about how we read characters. Is there any question? I think we can probably take one question. Any question from anyone, including those online? I actually have a question. Is there a difference between reading, like physically, reading versus reading on the computer? Would there be any difference? What do you think?
I think there may be some difference, but no one has done anything on this. They assume the screen is just like a piece of paper, but actually it's different. And if you hold a piece of paper, you can control the distance from it. But in our experiments, we fix the distance from the participant eyes to the screen. So you cannot observe anything yet, but it's a very interesting idea.
Yeah, a lot more research to do. Using eyeglasses, eye tracking glasses, that will be fascinating too.
Yes, yes. And the eye-link tool may allow us to do something like this.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Xiaofan, I think.
This is indeed very interesting research. And well, for Chinese, until 100 years ago, we read Chinese vertically.
Yes, yes.
So how would that affect the whole eye movement thing and the reading thing?
I don't know, because now we are reading vertically, so we do not explore any issue like that. But I believe it should. Okay, there may be some constraints because our viewing, we can see a larger angle vertically than the angle horizontally than vertically. I'm sorry, I got these two words wrong. Okay, so it may. I believe this behavior should be similar in terms of patterns. Yeah, because our ability to perceive things in reading should be a special case of viewing. This is my belief. So you go this way, if you are used to it, it should have similar reading pattern as you're reading like this. But should be there may be some other things different, because I haven't done anything on that yet. That's my guess only.
Thank you.
Just like if you add some space between words, or you give no words. At the beginning, people believe that having word spaces may help us, but the result turns out the answer is not. It's not.
Thank you. Thank you.
How about 繁体简体?
Oh, sorry.
In terms of visual complexity, in fact, we have got. I believe reading simplified Chinese should be easier than the traditional ones.
But the 繁体 is more looks like figure.
Yes.
Would that help to?
That's the somatic part. Somatic part. You need to do something before we can say anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't have much experience in the Chinese language, but my question is what the Chinese character is usually written without no space.
Without what?
The Chinese characters is usually written without no spacing.
Yes. There are two kinds of spacing. Of course, there are some space between every two characters, but there's a natural one. Of course, you can enlarge the spacing, or we can have some control on it. But when we say word spacing, that means the space between words is different from the tiny space between characters. Yes.
So my question is, do you think that our prior experience on learning, for example, the small kids, when it started learning the Chinese language, we used to study in this way. Do you think this prior experience can affect our way of reading? For example, like suppose he's grown up studying the language this way. So if we add some spaces of like if we done some changes,
yes.
Do you think that then?
Yes. Some people did some research on this, adding words into word space. That's how the learners significantly. But as for skilled readers, it caused some negative effect.
Thank you.
Very good question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you. We have our next presenter, Professor Anthony Chan. I think this.
Okay, thank you. So this is joint work with Janet Xiao from University of Hong Kong, Department of Psychology. Okay, so what we're interested in is studying eye movements because they reflect some kind of underlying cognitive process. And here we have two examples. The first one is a face recognition task. And it shows the first, second, third, and overall fixations. Right? And you can see the process of what they look at over time. Okay, and the second one is a free viewing task. And you can see different people actually have different preferred places that they want to look at. Okay, so during these original studies like this one, we actually found that each person actually has their own kind of fixation pattern, and each person is very different from other people. Okay, and there's these substantial individual differences that can also indicate differences in cognitive style based on how they look at certain stimuli. Okay. But if you look at the literature in the past, we found that most of the eye movement methods do not reflect the individual differences very well. Okay, a typical way you would look at analyze eye fixation was you would use a region of interest approach, or ROI, and basically the experimenter would define the ROIs. So here is one set of ROIs on a face from one experimenter, and this is another set of ROIs from another experimenter. And you can see there's differences, right? The second experimenter choose to have the same ROI for both eyes, whereas the first one has separate ROIs. Right? So this introduces some experimenter bias in the experiment, which may not be good. The second approach as a data-driven approach is the heat map approach. So you take all the fixations and you put a little Gaussian on them, and you get this heat map where the red location indicate looking more at that point, right? And green and yellow are less. And this is a set of fixations for correct trials. This is for incorrect trials. Okay, and then what you would do is you would look at the difference between these trials to get a difference map, and then try to interpret that difference map to say people in correct trials would look at this, people in incorrect trials would do this. Okay, so that works well if you have a lot of data, but it doesn't work well if you just have data for one individual. And this is the data from one individual. Okay, you can see the difference is not very intuitive. Right? There's a lot of differences, and you can't say exactly what's going on. Okay. Another problem is that the heat map approach doesn't use the transition information between fixations. Like after I look at a nose, I may look at the eyes. After I look at the eye, I may look at the mouth. Okay, so after looking at this, we developed a method for analyzing eye fixations using hidden Markov model. Okay, and what it does is we summarize each individual's fixations on a stimuli using one hidden Markov model, or HMM. Okay, and here is an example of one of these HMMs. So the ellipses are the ROIs, okay, and it corresponds to 2 standard deviations around the mean of a 2-dimensional Gaussian. Okay, and for each ROI, we have a prior value, which indicates where they would start looking at the stimuli. Okay, so for this person, 58% of the time, they would start in the green ROI, which is to the right above the nose. Okay, and then we have the transition probabilities. So starting from a red ROI here, you have 45% probability to stay in that ROI, 39% to go to green, and 16% to go to blue. Right? And we have these transition probabilities if you're in each of the ROIs, right? Where you would go next. So for this person, they tend to start at the green ROI here, and then maybe they would stay in the green ROI. 25% they would transition to blue next to the nose, and sometimes they would transition to the mouth, and so forth. So we can learn one of these HMMs, or estimate one of these HMMs for each individual. Then the question is, how do we get common strategies that people have? So we will take individual HMMs that we learned for, in this case, 4 subjects, okay? And then we run a clustering algorithm based on these HMMs to generate a representative set of HMMs. Okay? And what this clustering algorithm does is it kind of looks at all the ROIs and sees which ones are common, and then looks at the transition matrices, sees which ones are common, okay? And it forms groups where the whole fixation, the whole strategy is similar. Both the ROIs and the transitions are similar. Okay, so this is an example where we had 2 groups, maybe subject 1 and subject 2 are together, subject 3 and subject 4 together. Okay, so this is the basic idea. So I show you an example of this. Okay, so we ran this study on face recognition to see if the performance or strategy can reflect the cognitive ability of the person. And in particular, I want to examine cognitive decline in older adults. So we had 34 young and 34 older adults, okay, and they learned 20 faces in a learning phase. And then they had to recognize that on those 20 faces among 40 faces. Okay, and then for the older adults, we also gave them this MOCA test, which is the cognitive assessment test. Okay, and here is the results. So we learn an individual HMM for each person, and then we perform clustering. Okay, and these are the 2 clusters that we get, the HMMs for the 2 clusters. Okay, these are the fixations corresponding to each ROI. And these are the heat maps if we use those fixations. So the first strategy is what we call a holistic strategy. It means they tend to look only at the center line of the face and then perform the face recognition task only looking at the center. Okay. The second strategy was what we call an analytic strategy. So it means they tend to look at the center line of the face first, the green ROI here. So the prior is 82%. And then when they're in that ROI, they tend to look at the eyes, either the eyes, okay, and they switch back and forth between the eyes and the nose and the mouth. Okay, so you can see there's very different strategy here. One is only looking at one point on the face. The other is like kind of analyzing the face. Okay, so once we've done this, this is a bottom-up clustering only using fixations. We can analyze the cluster membership. Okay, and what we found is that there are more older adults that adopted this holistic pattern that only look at one location on the face. Okay, so these are older adults here. There's more that are holistic. But if we use a traditional comparison, I just select all the older adults and select all the younger adults, and I learn HMMs from them, right? And try to compare the fixations, we wouldn't see any real difference. And so here's a traditional comparison. This is the heat map for older adults. This is a heat map for younger adults, and this is the difference. So there's nothing intuitive you can gather from this. Right? And the reason is because some older adults may use an analytic strategy, and some younger adults may use a holistic strategy. And by combining them by age, you kind of confound that, you obscure that information. Okay, and if you use our HMM comparison, then you can see the difference in the fixation is very clear. Right? So the analytic people tend to look at the eyes, but holistic people tend to look at the nose. Okay. So now we have these two groups. Okay. Now we can actually do something very interesting is we can quantify a person's eye movement according to these two groups. Okay, so we define a similarity of each person's eye movements to one of these two groups, and we call this the HA scale. H is for holistic, A is for analytic. And it's just the log likelihood difference of that person's fixations under the two models, the holistic model and the analytic model, and then we normalize it. So if you have a positive value on this HA scale, then you tend to be more holistic. The holistic is on the left side here. And if a negative value, you tend to be more analytic. Okay, and here's a visualization of this scale. So on the right are more holistic people, more positive HA scale. And you can see the prototype, this is an individual model. This person tends to only look at the center line of the face. And on the far side, left side is the analytic model, right, which tends to look at the eyes and the mouth in sequence. And if I go in between, I can get kind of partial models. Like this one, they tended to look more at the center, but they also kind of look at the eyes sometimes. This one tends to look more at the eyes, but also looks at the center. So it's in between analytic and holistic. So with this, we can actually capture the individual differences of the eye movement strategy. Okay, what can we do with that? We can actually correlate this similarity measure with any other data that we have. For example, the cognitive ability. Okay, so here is a plot of the HA scale on the x-axis versus the MoCA score. So MoCA score higher means higher cognitive ability, lower means lower cognitive status. So you can, and there's a correlation. The more holistic you are, the lower your cognitive ability, according to MoCA. And this is actually the first time that we can show a link between eye movement strategy and cognitive ability. Okay, and here we also do it some other measurements, like a visual attention task or executive planning task. Okay, so in summary, using this EMHMM method, we demonstrate a link, explicit link between eye movement pattern and cognitive status in older adults. Okay, and we actually ran this study again to show that the effect works, can generalize. Yeah, so we replicated with a new set of older adults and we got the same result. So it suggests that eye tracking can be an efficient and low-cost method for early detection of cognitive decline. Okay, so that's the kind of our original path. But the problem with, well, I should say the limitation of this is that it assumes the stimuli is always the same configuration. So they're always looking at faces and the faces are aligned because the ROIs are based on the location, the fixation location. Okay, but what can we do if we have different stimuli, like natural images that don't have the same alignment of interesting features? Okay, so we developed another method called EMHMM with co-clustering to do this. Okay, and the idea is that here we have three different stimuli with different three different images. And we have four different subjects. Okay, and each subject views each image, and we get HMM for each subject and image. Okay, then we can cluster the subjects according to the common eye strategy among all the stimuli. Right. So in this case, subject 1 and subject 2 will be grouped together because on every image they have similar strategy. Although the images are different, the strategies are similar for those subjects, and the same for group 2. Okay, so now we can take like a free viewing task of natural images, show them a lot of different things, and then we can do clustering to see common strategy on those specific images. Okay, so here's an example of a scene perception task. We had 61 participants viewing 150 natural images, 150 urban images. Okay, and then they had to rate them from 1 to 5. And then later on, we gave them an object recognition task. Okay, and we just, after clustering, we find two different types of patterns. One is explorative pattern, which is like this. So they tend to look at different parts of the image more. And one is a focus pattern, where they tend to only look at the face of the object, face of the animal, or just the animal. Okay, and we can also compare whether certain images can induce larger differences between these groups. Okay, and it turns out the animal images will induce larger difference in the groups of people. Okay, so if I wanted to distinguish these people, I would use the animal images. Okay, and we can also correlate the explorative focus scale, the EF scale, with different metrics. So in this case, we use a flanker task. Or sorry, we correlate with some tasks based on executive function or visual attention. Okay, and we found that yes, we found that it's correlated with the flanker task accuracy and also tower blend and tree planning time. Okay, so that's how we can handle an experiment where the images are different, different stimuli. Yeah, the final thing we did is we were interested in a decision-making task. So we want to model how a person's strategy changes over time. Okay, so here we have two strategies. One is the strategy during an exploration period, and another is a strategy when they have to make a decision. So this is a decision task. They have to say which face is more attractive. Okay, and we assume that in the beginning they explore the faces, and then later on they say, okay, I think this face is more attractive, and that's their preference by its period. Okay, so we learned something called a switching HMM, which means that they start off in the exploration stage, and then they're allowed to stay in the exploration stage, or later on they switch to the preference stage, okay, and then they can't go back. And then we tried to model the HMMs in this case. And we found some interesting things. The first is when we perform clustering of these using this switching HMM, the group A has a longer exploration period compared to group B. Okay, group A also tends to look at the left side longer than group B. Okay, and then group A also has a stronger bias towards the face that they selected in the end when they're in their decision-making phase, preference bias phase. Okay, and then we can make these gaze cascade plots, which is the percentage of time viewing the selected face in the last 2.5 seconds of the trial. So here is it's like 50% probability of seeing the selected looking at the chosen face. But then at some point, maybe 1 second before, you can see that it increases. And that's when they made the decision that they wanted to select that face. Okay. And the group A actually has this gaze cascade effect happen early. So you can predict what they're going to do about 1 second earlier than group B. Right? And also group A had a significant difference in terms of the probability they will look at the chosen face at the end. So in summary, with our EMHMM method, we can do 4 things. The first is we generate individual HMMs with personalized ROIs and transitions among the ROIs. Then we can discover common patterns through clustering of the individual HMMs. Okay, then using these clusters, we can quantify similarity of the eye movements of an individual's eye movement strategy to those clusters and get a scale. Okay, and then with that scale, we can examine a relationship with other measures like behavioral data. Okay, and here we've done it for face recognition, but in Janet's lab, they've done this on a lot of other tasks. Okay, and in EMHMM is a data-driven approach. Okay, and we can discover these new associations with other measures like cognitive ability, comprehension, and other things. We also had one on sleep. Okay, and it also enhances our understanding of the cognitive phenomena. And things also misidentification of facial expressions and insomnia. But that was a study on sleep. But I didn't present it because it wasn't time. Okay, so if you want to use our toolbox, you can download it here. There's a QR code. You can go to my website, and this toolbox includes all the things I've talked about. And it's in MATLAB. It's fairly easy to use. There's a tutorial. And I'd like to acknowledge our collaborator, Janet Xiao from the University of Hong Kong, who helped to do all of the psychology studies. I'm only in charge of analyzing the data. Any questions?
Fascinating. Questions, anyone? Yeah. I guess I just have maybe I just start with a comment. When you look at all those different ways of looking at facial expression, I have seen I can feel that I've used both methods. I think that's one of the things you've mentioned. If I have a more engaging interaction, I probably would start looking left and right. But if it's just like a quick glance, I would probably go more vertical. Yeah, and then I think it's interesting that you also observe that older people tend to have, kind of just kind of a spot kind of a looking, and that's actually consistent with the literature on the older people. Yeah, so that's really interesting. I see a lot of consistency with the literature. Anyone has any questions? This is really fascinating.
I'm wondering whether reading words and face recognition share some similar things in this. Yes. Because we have a preferred viewing location at the slightly left to the left from the center in word reading, and I see those fixations are basically on the nose or something like that. So I'm not sure whether object recognition follows some common principle.
Yes, so I think we've done some studies on English, not single word reading, but sentences, and that's the active line of research now. Yeah, so we're using because each sentence will have different structure, so we try to use co-clustering to treat each sentence as a separate stimuli. So yeah, we're actively trying to do on reading now.
So follow up on that question. Is it because we tend to read from the left to the right? Let's say when you look at the face, you also tend to focus more on the left side before you move on to the right side.
So for these experiments, the subject looks at the fixation cross, and then the face appears at the top or bottom. So they have to make an initial fixation, and they may overshoot or undershoot up and down. So that's why most of the fixation are in a line in the first fixation, although they may want to just look at the center. In terms of the preferred view location, I think it's like slightly to the left of the nose. Janet did a study on this a long time ago. Yeah, I forget exactly, but it's like slightly to the left because you get more information on one side. It has something to do with the brain structure, the high frequency, low frequency structure.
Yeah, for the facial recognition task, so it is the emotions that displayed by the actor would be a neutral emotion, or it could be containing either positive or negative emotion. because yeah, I'm going to present and I will also talk something about the age differences in processing like the emotional information. So I just would like to get a quick clarification from your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, so for the face recognition task, it's a neutral face. But we've also done some studies on emotion, but I don't know the results. I'm not familiar with that study, but they've done it for like angry, sad, and happy faces under different conditions, like with audio, without audio, and without image as a control. But like, and they also do studies. Yeah, but I think I can send you some pictures. We have some.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Thank you, Anthony. Our next speaker is Dr. Danny Young. She also has a lot of research in this area.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Professor Na, for inviting me to join this computational communication research roundtable series. My name is Danny. I'm from Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences. By training, I'm psychology. So that's why the topic that I'm going to share would be related to how we can make use of eye tracking in order to improve our understanding of human behaviors. In the following presentation, you could see some similarity of Professor Chan's topic. In particular, my research area will be focused on middle-aged and older population with a particular interest in their work behaviors, their emotion and attention. And if we extend to the late adulthood, then we would be interested in understanding retirement planning and their actual adjustment, as well as what would be the factors in order to influence our well-being in late adulthood. For my research, in order to guide my studies on attention and emotion, I make use of a theoretical framework from Professor James Gross, a faculty member from Stanford University, in order to help us understand why it is so critical in order to make use of visual attention to help understand our emotional and behavioral responses. In particular, according to the existing aging and psychology literature, we found that what kinds of information that we pick from our physical environment indeed would be very critical in order to determine what information to be further processed as well as analyzed at the upper level in order to determine our emotional feeling as well as behavioral responses. So as my research focus on aging, so I would like to give you a very brief background about why it is kind of guiding or inspire me in order to work on attention and emotional research. In particular, one of the most influential aging theories, socio-emotional sensitivity theory, argue that older people indeed demonstrate a positivity effect, such that why I asked Professor Chan about particular questions related to those emotions displayed by the actor in the facial recognition task. In particular, we found that older adults spend much longer time when they are presented with positive pictures, but less time on the negative emotion compared to their younger counterparts. One of my collaborators from US, Derek Isaac, have been using this type of pictures in which a neutral face is paired with an emotional face. Such emotional face could be either a positive face or negative face. In particular, in his study conducted around 2006, he found that for older adults, when they are presented with this pair of neutral and emotional face, they look at the positive face much longer and try to look away from those negative faces. such that we believe that how much how do older people process the information would determine what kinds of information they could remember at a later stage. Because if you refer to the previous slide figure, that would be how you pick the information from your physical environment that would determine what kinds of information to be further processed and retained in your memory system. Such that I would like to replicate such kinds of ideas about positivity effect in the workplace like context. In particularly, based on the previous literature, older people seem to be looked away from negative stimuli from their physical environment. Then a question immediately popped out in my mind is whether older workers, at the time that they are facing some negative event, such as in the workplace, we may have some quarrels or arguments with our co-workers, and how their developmental attentional pattern might influence their way to select information from their physical environment and subsequently influence their emotional and behavioral responses. Such that in our project, which is funded by GLF, we proposed a question in order to examine some work-related behavior. In particular, we would like to see how the younger and older workers differ in their visual fixation on the opposing partners when they are experiencing a workplace conflict, which subsequently determines what kinds of emotion they feel about the conflict situation, as well as the way in order to manage the conflict situation. So we have some hypotheses, as shown here. In particular, we would expect, based on the previous life aging literature, older workers tend to fixate less on an opposing partner because they might show some negative emotion during the conflict situation, which subsequently contribute to more positive and fewer negative emotion for the conflict incident, as well as fewer use of some more adaptive like conflict strategies. So in our studies, we recruited 94 Hong Kong Chinese working adults to come to our laboratory in order to conduct the eye tracking experiment. And among them, there were 48 younger workers aged between 20 to 34, and 46 older workers aged between 40 to 68. And this refers to the experimental procedure. In particular, our research team created some hypothetical intergeneration and non-intergenerational workplace conflict video, which were presented to each participant in a randomized order. So intergenerational conflict refers to the conflict situation involving two co-workers of different age groups. So one is older age group and the other is younger age group. Well, non-intergenerational workplace conflict refers to the two co-workers of the same age group, either younger or older age groups. And we also have a control like video as a pillar, which was placed in the middle in order to filter out the potential like effect from the first video. We measured the participants' visual fixation when they were viewing each conflict video. And after they have seen each video, then we asked them to report on their emotional as well as conflict strategies toward each conflict event. And on this slide, you can see some snapshot of the video that we have shown to the participant. So our research team created all this live video based on the actual live work situation, as well as to hire some actor and actress in order to help us produce this conflict video. So in each conflict video, we involve the two same gender co-workers to take part in the video recording. And we try to match the age and gender group of the main actor. So main actor refers to the actor or actress on the right-hand side. So imagine if I'm one of the participants in these studies. So I will be presented with version 2, in which to match with my age as well as gender group to make the participant to feel more kinds of like real when they are encountering such kinds of workplace conflict. And our pilot tests have demonstrated similar like conflict intensity across these 4 versions to make sure that the 4 versions that we presented to the participant of different age group as well as gender group would generate similar effects. And we also created a non-intergenerational workplace conflict video, which are similar to what I described, depending on the age and gender of the participant, in order to select the correct version for them to watch and measure their visual fixation. So for this particular presentation, I highlighted those findings that's shown in my eye tracking studies. In particular, as you could see on the left-hand side, it refers to the result of the intergenerational conflict. That means when presenting the participant, both the younger and older participant, with the conflict video involving co-workers of two different age groups, then we found that younger worker fixated like more on the negative facial expressions of their opposing partners than that of the older workers, because the orange bar illustrates the fixation and duration on the opposing party when they are viewing the intergenerational conflict. However, such kinds of like age-related differences could not be found in the non-intergenerational conflict like video. And in contrast, we found that when the participants were viewing those conflicts involving the same age group, then their fixation pattern looked at more on their the main actors instead of the opposing parties. And we also make use of this visual fixation in order to help us explain the existing age differences in emotion and behavioral responses. In particular, we found that the existing age differences in positive emotion, that is older like adults, tend to feel more positive emotion than their younger counterparts. That could be explained by the positivity effect that I introduced earlier. But more important, we found that such kinds of age differences could be explained by our visual fixation, particularly how you process the information from your physical environment it determines your emotional feeling. The same pattern could also apply that to the way that we select our conflict strategies. In particularly for older adults, for older workers in our sample, when they fixated less on the opposing partners, then their tendency to make use of avoidance would be much greater than their younger counterparts. So in some, this particular research have been demonstrated our age differences in visual attention. So similar to the existing like Asian literature, that even younger workers, they could spend more time on viewing the opposing partner when experiencing an intergenerational conflict. And the emotional feeling, as well as the actual way to manage the conflict incidents, are somewhat determined by what kinds of information that they have been selected when they were processing the conflict scenarios. And we also extend our existing finding on the Asian literature to the work context. In particularly, peer studies mainly we put participants ages 65 and above. Then we our study actually found that since middle adulthood around the age of 40 up to 65, we could still show some trends of positivity effect. In particularly, middle-aged working adults show greater tendency to look away from those negative stimuli, such as when you have some interpersonal conflict with your co-workers or interface partner. Sometimes middle-aged adults may tend to look away from the facial expression, which may be effective way for them in order to regulate their emotion and as well as maintain their affective well-being. And in the following two more slides, I would like to also introduce some eye-checking studies that we have conducted in our psychology laboratory. First of all, will be a study that I collaborated with Dean of Class, Professor Richard Walker, in order to evaluate the effectiveness of information policy tools. In particular, in the studies that conducted among college students, we presented to them with some poster about environmental protection, such as food waste reductions, recycling, or energy saving, etc. And then we measure their fixation when they are processing different parts of a poster. So usually for a poster or flyer, they include image, text, or slogan. Then we would like to see how their fixation on different parts of these various elements, like image, text, or slogan, as you can see on the right hand side, that could contribute to their subsequent change in their behavioral intention to perform environmental protection. Particularly, we have the pre and post like measure to capture their behavioral, their environmental protection intention. And subsequently, we correlate with their fixation while they were presented with all these posters in order to identify what would be the element to be effective in order to affect their behavioral intention. A similar design, a similar study was also conducted by my undergraduate student, Wilson Mock, in order to evaluate the design of cigarette-like package. In particular, she would like to evaluate whether the graphic or the warning message on a cigarette package would be more influential in order to influence those non-smokers' attitude towards light smoking. Such that for our research, we tend to be more like applied by employing the eye tracking technology in order to improve our understanding of human like behavior, such as like the attitude towards different issues, including smoking, environmental protection, or how we can make use of eye tracker in order to understand the visual processing during the way when we interact with other people and subsequently influence our behavioral like action. So that's all about my presentation here. Just summarized some eye trackers that we have been using in our laboratory as well as in my collaboration with other faculty members from PO. Okay, so that's all about my presentations.
A very interesting presentation. So I have to ask a quick question. I have to go for another meeting. Can you go back 2 slides on the cigarette warning? So when I look at this one, I would say that I need to look at the warning to understand the context, but the graphics of probably I will look at it more carefully. It will look scary. So that's an interesting way to look at this whole thing. Yeah. But anyway, I have to go for a meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your attendance of this presentation. Thank you.
Other questions? So that was interesting in seeing the avoidance versus the I tend to use the word confrontation just because as you're presenting, I was thinking, looking at the person's life cycle, it seems like when they are younger, they are more confrontational, and as they get older, they become perhaps more relaxed.
Yeah, we call like passive, more passive strategies.
Yeah, and that's very interesting that you have the eye tracking data to show that, which I think enhance the findings in the literature a lot more. Yeah, very interesting.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? Okay, very, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we have a little bit of an issue here that we can discuss and see what would like to do. We have one more speaker, Dr. Luo. However, he's also in the EEG session later, so he will have to stay in any case. So what I was thinking is that perhaps we can perhaps take like a 15 minutes break, and then we'll continue with Professor Luo's presentation. And then we move on to the EEG. And I think Professor Kidd also mentioned you do some EEG work.
We have a colleague.
Oh, you have a colleague. Oh,
Dr. Ho Xiwen, I think she's coming.
Okay. You were referring to her.
Yes.
Okay, I see. Okay, that was what I saw on the class website where you are in eye tracking and she's in the EEG. Okay, so does anyone have any other questions for just any questions, even ideas that you have for research that you would like to? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Because actually my major is computational neuroscience, and somehow I'm studying the visual processing in terms of the neural interaction. But what I want to say is what actually I studied before, based on my background, what is responsible for eye tracking and eye movement, something called superior collicular, which is in the midbrain, which is like a relay connecting the visual between the neurons from visual cortex and to the motor cortex, because the eye tracking is controlled by motor cortex. But also is highly related based on the memory and experience. This is the point didn't know how we can, for example, because we sometimes I've seen we divided our results as a specific category, but if these categories can maybe change based on the experience. For example, like if we are now comparing between younger and old people, so if we repeated this experiment maybe 20 years later, can we find the same result? Like the people are going to go to different experience and maybe the result as well. Here is my question, and I would like to know what do you think about that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So over time, do we change, our patterns? I guess that's overall. That's the key. Any panelists would like to address that, or even any of the audience? Have we been changing our behavior? Have we looked at our eye tracking research before, I don't know, maybe decades ago versus now, and how might we change in the future? Anyone would like to say anything?
I try to adjust a little bit, but not directly from the eye tracking research, because I think this field is relatively new, such that we don't have that kind of like longitudinal research in order to kind of like trace how their fixational or visual attentional pattern change. But we can get insights from other developmental research, in particularly talking about some dispositional factors such as like our personality trait. And we found that older people indeed would show somewhat different personality characteristics when they go older. And as the theory, the aging theory that I have mentioned in my talk, which related to their emotional goals, would change when they grow older. In particular, older people tend to focus more on some emotional satisfaction when they reach the age of 60 or 70, while the younger people tend to focus more on knowledge goals, such that I believe, like young adult like you, maybe 20 to 30 years later, your goal orientation or maybe your emphasis could be quite different from today's. And that's why you would also pick up the information quite different from 20 to 30 years ago. So I would say this would be some individual changes over time. But whether that would really confirm what I propose here awaits more further investigation.
I think this is a very interesting question, and looking at the theory of evolution, I think it's possible that we all are changing, humankind, the way we, for example, we used to have to remember phone numbers, so which might tap up on certain part of the brain, but these days we don't even anymore because we don't have to. So there's a lot of changes, I think, in us, where our brain might even be changed. I mean, we used to have tails, now we don't have tails anymore. So, things like that, which is interesting. I think Professor Chan would like to comment as well.
So we've done some, because we know which strategy is better for face recognition. So we've tried doing training sessions to try to make people better. And actually, it doesn't really work well for adults. And we found that actually when you're young is when you're most susceptible, most able to change your eye fixation pattern, up until maybe 10-ish, and then it becomes stable. So we have to focus the training strategy at the very early stage. So we have some proposals on doing this kind of longitudinal study for young children to show that how they develop and whether we can modify the way they look at things to improve their face recognition. For example, for kids that have some development problems.
Yeah. Okay, I hope that addressed some of the issues. Any others? If not, we'll take a break. I think we have our next set of panelists here, and our panelists are welcome to stay. If that would be great if you would like to stay, and we have new panelists that will be joining us. Okay, we will continue the second part of our roundtable. Earlier we had EEG, we had eye tracking presentations. We had 3 presentations, and then we actually have the 4th one that is move to part 2, where Dr. Luo Xiaowei will actually be continuing the presentation on the eye tracking part, and then we'll move on to the EEG part, where Dr. Huang Shuwen from Department of Linguistics and Translation she will talk about her EEG work. And then we will then move on back to Dr. Luo Xiaowei again, and in the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering to talk about his EEG work. Do you prefer to present both at the same time or separate?
Okay.
Oh, okay. So maybe we can have you present both if you like, and then after that we'll move to Dr. Huang from linguistics, and then finally we will have Dr. Jie from Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences. I'm actually trying to speak Cantonese and I'm not good with Cantonese. Dr. Jie from Xie, actually, Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences. So I guess we can start with Dr. Luo slides and presentations. I think we still have to share, right, Lawrence? Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for the invitations to join these roundtables. So my name is Xiaowei Luo from Architecture and Civil Engineering departments. So in these presentations, I will briefly talk about our research of eye trackings and EEG for construction safety. So the first part is on eye trackings. Okay, so before I talk about those research, I want to give you a brief background about why do we conduct this research in our domain? Because most of you might be from social science or computer science. So for construction is one of the peer industry in Hong Kong. So it employs more than 10% of the laborers in Hong Kong. And also, if we talk about the safeties, the construction safety is one of the highest industries with the most, the largest fatality rate among all those industries. It is the top 3. And then this is the very famous Heinrich domino series of how an accident happens. So as you can see here, when an injury happens, behind is an accident. So when an accident happens, behind it is unsafety act. And then also there will be the unsafety act. It is because of the fault of a person. And also the fault of a person is because of the social environment. So the human errors is as you can see here, the human error is the root cause of the safety accidents. And then the impaired cognitive states, like those distractions, mental fatigue, and etc., would lead to the human errors. That is the root cause of accidents. So if we want to eliminate the safety accidents, we must eliminate the human errors. And the sociological measurements tools like the eye trackings and EEGs, they can offer quantitative and objective data to indicate the human's cognitive states, which can measure those human errors in the work. So the first sections I would like to talk about is the eye tracking devices. So here are some of the eye tracking devices that we use for our research, which include head-mount display eye trackers, which are used for virtual realities, and also the wearable eye trackers, which we use on the construction side, and also the screen-based eye trackers, which are used in the lab. And here shows some of the visualizations of eye movements, which is similar to what you see in the last sections, including the scan paths, heat map, and etc. So in our research group, we conduct the research using eye trackings for different domains. And in these presentations, we will just focus on the construction safety. So here are two of the example projects that we work on for hazards. So the first one is the eye tracking applications in enhancement and assessments for the hazard recognition abilities. So for the hazard recognitions, because on the construction job site, there are a lot of different hazards there. Like there might be some hazards that is caused by the working conditions. There might be hazards caused by the human errors. So we usually on the construction job site, you will have the safety supervisors that work around the construction job site to do the safety inspection and try to identify those hazards. And second way is that it relies on the laborers on the construction job site to continuously look around and try to identify those hazards. And if they found those hazards, they need to eliminate those hazards to prevent accidents from happening. So under the first type of research, we conduct three sub-projects. The first one is investigating the role of safety experience in hazard identifications. We try to investigate whether the experience of the workers can help to improve the hazard identification abilities. And the second one is guiding the visual attentions during the hazard identifications using eye trackings, modeling examples, which is to learn from the experienced workers and try to train those students in the college. And then the third one is to integrate the VR with eye trackings in assessing the hazards recognition abilities. And the second sub-project that we work on is measuring the effectiveness of visualizations applied in construction safety management using the eye trackings, which is supported by the UGC funding, which is a small part of our larger projects, which try to investigate the information overload in construction safety. Because just like in our daily life, when we are using the cell phone, we will receive many news or many messages from WeChat or Facebook and etc. If those informations is over your processing capacities, it might affect your performance of decision making. So that's why we are trying to look at this topic. And here is the similar backgrounds of construction safety. It just shows that the accidents in construction industry, it is increasing a little bit in the past few years. And here shows some of the hazard identifications on construction job site. So basically, the hazard identifications is a visual search task, so that of those hazards, so that those eye tracking approach is applicable to review the identification process. So for example, like on the left-hand side, it is a screenshot of the construction site. You can see that there is a safety hazard, which means that the construction workers is not wearing the safety belts. And for the second one, you can see that here there is an opening hose on the platform. However, it didn't provide the safety guardrails for this hole. And then the third one is more complex than the previous two. And then we are trying to analyze how the people search the safety hazards in those environments. So here are the some of the studies that we mentioned in the first sub-projects. So for the first topic is investigating the role of safety experience in hazard identifications. So as you can imagine that the experience will be can benefit the cognitive process of the hazard identifications. So here is the cognitive process of hazard identification where the experience plays a key role. So here you have the stimulus from the outside. And for workers on the construction job site, they will sense the information from the environment. And then when they sense all those environment, they will not pick up all those information from the outside because there are too much very rich information outside. They will select the information based on their experience. And then so that they will perceive some of the informations. And then those informations will go for response suggestions. And then also it will go for the processing in the brain. And then after they process these informations, they will make the decisions and then respond to the outside environment. And the eye checkings is actually very promising in indicating one's prior experience. And it is useful to understand how those construction workers or safety supervisors, they search for the hazards on their actual work routines. So this shows our research process for the first one. So for the first sub-projects, we use the video cameras to take a 360-degree image on the construction job site. And then we put those images into the VR headset and then show those scenarios to two groups of workers. The first group of workers is the experienced workers, which include the safety managers, the safety supervisors, and the safety directors. And then the second type of the inexperienced workforce include those workers who newly joined the construction industry, and also the students that is studying civil engineering and constructions in the college. Then we conduct the eye checking experience and ask those two groups of workers to look for those safety hazards in the scenarios, and then record those performance data and the eye movement data, and try to find out whether there are some difference in the hazards identification performance, the attention allocations, and the search patterns. So we present 18 different scenarios to those workers, which covers most of the safety hazards on the construction job site. Here just shows simple examples. And here shows how the workers view those scenarios in the VR headset. And then when the workers or the subject, they discovered any potential hazards, they will click their mouse in their hand. And here shows compare the difference between the novice and the experienced supervisors. So as you can see here, it finds that for some type of the safety hazards, there actually exists a significant difference in the performance accuracy. And then here we also analyze what the attention allocations of those workers in the heat map. And because of the time limitations, we will not go through those results in details. But here shows we analyze the allocation, attention allocations in each kind of the AOIs, and also what are the difference in the scan pass. And the second one is using the EMME to guide the visual attentions during the hazard identifications. So the motivations of these studies is that we found out that the experience actually helped them to increase their hazards identifications performance. So that we want to show the college students how to find those safety hazards on the construction job site. So the eye movements modeling examples is a video showing how the experts perform a task, overlaying the experts' real-time gaze points and the voice. So here shows how do we develop the EMV and conduct the experiment. So we use the topic glass 3, and then ask the safety supervisor to wear it, and then go through the construction job site, and then to identify the hazards in the real job site. And then this will help us to shoot those videos, and then we will show this EMME interference to the college students after the pre-test. So in the before we show these videos, we will test the hazard abilities first, hazard identification ability first, and then after we show them those interference, we will do another test to evaluate the hazard identification performance. So here shows examples of the video. So we both use the task performance and the visual attention matrix to evaluate the performance of the learners. And here shows we compare the identifications performance, and it is found out that after we show this interference to the learners, the performance will get improved. And here also shows the attention allocation within each kind of the AOI. And then the third subtopics that we work on is integrating the VR with eye checkings to assess the hazard identification abilities. So in the past, really, if we want to evaluate the workers or the learners' hazard identification abilities, we will use the exam to ask them to finish those questions. However, using those examinations, they only shows the result, but they cannot show the reasons behind those results. So that we try to use the eye checkings to analyze what are the mechanisms behind. So here shows some of the matrices that we adopt in our study. And then here shows the research process. So the first step is we develop the virtual realities scenarios using the Revit, SketchUp, and 3D Max. Then we put all those models into the virtual, into Unities to build those games. And then the second one is we do the eye checkings test implementations. So first we do the calibrations, and then ask the students to do the hazard identification task, and then give them the questionnaire to seek their feedbacks. And then the third step is to do the data analysis, including the performance data and eye movement data analysis. So here shows some of the scenarios we developed in the virtual realities. And here shows how the subject use the VR headset to look for those hazards in the 3D scenarios. And here shows some of the eye checkings matrix that we selected to indicate the hazard identifications abilities. And we conduct a correlation test, and then found out that those eye checkings matrix has strong correlations with the identifications accuracy, so that those eye checkings matrix can be used to measure the hazard identification abilities. And then the second project that we work on is measuring the effectiveness of visualizations applied in construction safety management using the eye checkings. We have talked about the motivations before, so that to present all those different rich informations outside to the construction workers or the managers, we want to see which visualizations approach would be more beneficial for their decision making. So basically, we Here shows the research framework. So the first one is we build the cognition models for visualizations processing, and then identify the indicators for effectiveness measurement, and then do the eye checkings for validating these indicators. So the cognition models is similar to the ones we showed before. And then we conduct, this is the experimental setup. Basically, we use the Tobii Pro Nanos for the eye checkings data collections. And then these are the experimental stimulus and tasks that we show to this subject. So basically, we have two tasks for those subjects. The first one is ask them to find out what to do next in the given situations. So basically, we have two types of visualizations approach. The first one is using the flowchart, and the second one is the cross-function flowchart. Both of those visualizations are commonly used in the construction industry. And then for the second one is second task is to do the cost analysis of safety accidents. So one is the tree diagrams, and the second one is fishbone chart. So for the first one, it is most commonly used in construction safety and also the nuclear engineering. And the second one is also commonly used on construction industries. So here shows the procedures. So basically, first we ask those subjects to read the instructions, and so that they will understand what they need to do in the experiment. And then they will observe the stimulus and answer those problems. And here shows some of the results in the task performance and also the eye checkings matrix. Okay, so for the EEG, we also right now what we are going to present here focus on the construction safety. And the backgrounds is very similar to the eye checkings. So we will just skip here. So EEG is an everyone knows what is EEG. So it is just to measure those signal on in the brain. And then the spontaneous EEG signals exist in the human's brain. And then they can also be divided into different bands based on the frequency. And in our current studies, we here shows two examples of our current work. The first one is using the wearable EEG devices for the distraction monitoring. The second one is to investigate the situation awareness preference under the work log, and which is assessed by EEG. So the first one is EEG applications for distraction monitoring. So why we want to monitor the distractions of the construction workers? Because the distractions commonly occur on the construction job site. It can be caused by the external environment or the internal motion. For example, if I argues with another person last night, then maybe today when I'm working, I will got distraction and still think about the scenarios before. And it shows that short distraction due to the cell phone vibrations can double the error rate. And then if longer distractions can even triple the error rate on the construction job site. And also based on the fishbone analysis, you can see that a large percentage of the accidents actually happens due to the distractions. So the second one is that the second problem is that the traditional approach is not appropriate for distraction monitoring. Usually, in the past, we would use the subjective ratings to, for example, like those scales to evaluate the distractions. And also, we can also use performance, for example, like the reaction time, error rate, and near miss rate to measure the distraction of the workers. However, using other more subjective measures, it can better evaluate the distractions. For example, using eye movements, EEG temperature detections, heart rate variabilities, and exertions. So here shows the research workflow. So basically, we also use the hazard identification as a task to evaluate the distractions of the workers. So that first we design the 4 hazards identification tasks, and then use the such paradigms induce distractions for the workers, and then acquire those data using different sensors, and then do the data analysis. And here shows some of the 4 hazards image, which we shows to the construction workers, and then ask the construction workers to identify which pictures contains the safety hazards regarding working on height. And then after we collect those EEG data, we will do the data analysis, which includes the pre-processing, feature extractions, and SV and classifications, which is the standard process of EEG analysis. And then here shows some of the research findings. So for example, the temporal regions is indicative for the audio distracted attentions. And then through the features calculations and extractions, it is found out that the betas and gamma powers in the left temporal and right prefrontal cortex that can distinguish the distractions and the focus attentions, especially in the channels T7 and AF4. That will be all for my presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Jocko?
Yeah, Dr. Luo. Actually, there's no questions, but just the comments. I'm not familiar with the safety and construction and all these things, but it seems that your experiment setting is already as close as to the most trendy topic nowadays, the metaverse. so yeah, we are in the communication departments and the computer science department who are actually looking at these things. So if you are interested, I would be more than interested to, well, maybe we can collaborate together and do some things on that metaverse things using your devices.
I have a question regarding the cleansing and pre-processing, because as you mentioned, there's so much noise. So how do you go about cleaning those? Because I do have a set of EEG data, and we are also facing challenges, kind of removing all the noises. So what is the most efficient way of doing that?
Right now, we try to in our studies, we didn't go for the field tests. We are still doing the tests in the lab. So we try to minimize the movement of the subject. And however, we cannot eliminate the movement of the subject. So we use different toolbox to filter out those movement noise. And we can provide more technical details later.
Yeah. Thank you. And on one of your slides, you have got the N back. Can you explain the N back? What is that, and what is the role of it? In your research.
Can you share the screen first?
Towards the end, that one, yes. What is this N-back paradigm? I'm actually curious.
I can go back to check on this one. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other question? Professor Kip, do you have a question? Okay. How about anyone online? You have to unmute yourself because we are not looking at the chat. Yeah, this is excellent. We have crosses on various disciplines, so this is really a great opportunity for interdisciplinary research. Okay, thank you, Dr. Luo. We will move to the next presentation by Dr. Huang Shuwen. She is in linguistics, so we'll hear more about linguistics and translation.
everyone. Thank you for inviting me to come here. So my topic I said here is deciphering language of mind and brain across human lifespan. So my research focus is always centered on semantic retrieval. Because for humans, language comprehension is very important skill for our normal everyday life. And in particular, this ability, language comprehension, also occupy a very important and unique position to study cognitive aging. Because as opposed to the attention, memory, and other cognitive abilities, most of those abilities will decline with age. However, it seems like language comprehension ability is relatively protected against the age-related degradation. So that's very brief about my background so that you know why I'm doing the research in a very different perspective. So my training is actually neuroscience, from the very basic molecular neuroscience all the way to cognitive neuroscience. So in my research, I take a very interdisciplinary approach in my work so that I bring together with the psychological approaches, neuroscience, as well as the computational modelings to examine the effects of age-related and individual variations on cognitive functions, as well as their neural connectivities across the entire lifespan. So why language comprehension is a actually fascinating topic to study, and actually I studied this topic for like a lot of times, a lot of years. Because to successfully comprehend language, we need to really fast analyze the perceptual events. And then we need to integrate the information and search for the long-term memory, and also make sure that how to respond at the current stage. So I like this humor a lot, because study language comprehension, a lot of times we not only study words, single words, all the way to sentences. I also like to study why people sometimes misunderstand or making some humorous responses. So this is a very interesting input I like. So that I hope that you can all read this. So this is Zhang Fei. So 他的仆人说 every time before the fight, Zhang Fei needs to get all the pens at his home and carefully calculate how many pens he has at home. They don't know why. They ask him. So Zhang Fei said, because General said, if you know how many pens, then you know you will fight successfully. 知己知彼，百战百胜. So if you know that, you found it's very weird, but it's also really interesting because you need to consider the guy who say this, whose background, who has a very minimal literacy, very minimal education training. So that during language processing, we need to do a lot of mental calculation. So that my perspective is I need to provide some linguistic input. So that's perceptual level. And then I use a neurocognitive function method in looking into how they calculate all those linguistic materials, as well as integrate their attention and their past experiences. And then the measurement would be whether they, at the end, it will be fun and successfully comprehend, or they make some of the decisions. So that, I hope that you get the humorous point here, 知己知彼, and that you need to know others, then you will be successfully fight. But Zhang Fei only knows that knowing how many pens at home, so 知己知彼. So this is why I think language comprehension is really interesting and fascinating to study. We talked about EEG before, but just really quick about talking about the another aspect of using EEG. So EEG is a technique that we could directly measure neural activities. So that in the laboratory, we all put a cap on the participant's head, and then we present some stimulus, words, pictures, sounds, sentences, whatever. And then we ask participants to do something with it. And then we record the brain responses, and that will be the thing that Professor Luo just mentioned, the ongoing EEG, so the electrical activities. Therefore, we can not only analyze their different frequency bands and also the oscillations. However, to my research, I also analyzed the event-related potentials. What is the meaning of event? So the event is what we ask participants to do. So that's the event. For instance, in this picture is the word, single word. So when participants read a word, and then it comes back to the 0 means that the participant received the information. And then we could use the signal processing method to analyze the event related, how participants analyze the visual information over time. So this is event-related potentials. So while this method is very good to study language processing, it is because not only this is non-invasive, but also it's a direct measure of neural responses, which is good to study language because language unfolds in time and the temporal specificity of EEG is very good. Lastly, and that's also very important, because it does not require participants to actually make explicit responses. Therefore, we are not only able to study adult language processing, we are also able to study elderly, as well as we are able to study young infants. So this is several advantages to use EEG and ERPs to study language. Okay, so now actually get into my research. So what I'm doing, so the aim of my research is to examine the neurocognitive changes of language comprehension across the lifespan. I'm trying to understand what kind of factors that will promote effective language processing. So now there are 4 aspects. So I'm not only study how the words being processed, I also study the visual word, auditorial information, trying to understand the linguistic, what kind of linguistic factors that will impact our understanding. And then study most of the studies are done is in conducting in the using of undergrads, so young adults. And then I also study elderly because I try to understand why some of the older adults, they are able to understand language for sure, but some of the older adults cannot. So what kind of factors that will impact their ability to comprehend language? I also study hemispheric differences because we have 2 hemispheres. So the brain just have 2 sides, just like our body side. So I try to understand throughout the whole lifespan, what kind of factors that will promote and help the participant to compensate the age-related declines. So that's another aspect. And not only using EEG and ERPs, I also collaborate with other researchers to use MRI and MEG to better understand the neurological and connectivities of why the signals I look like from my results. So below, I just quickly elaborate some of my research. So one line of research, I study hemispheric asymmetries. So there's no doubt that hemispheric asymmetry, 2 hemispheres are specialized to doing things differently. It's phenomenal. However, it is, I think the most important thing is the collaboration of the 2 hemispheres and create a balance of the neural components so that in this kind of research, we could use psychological methods, so visual half-field paradigms, so that I could present words into different visual field in order to create a visual bias. So the information presented to the left visual field will first project to the right hemisphere, so that we could take advantage of the information processing time in order to understand what kind of information the right hemisphere could contribute to during the language comprehension. So that we see that left hemisphere is for sure very important for language processing, but right hemisphere is also important to make the reading very interesting, such that for the readers who are able to generate a lot of imageabilities and imageries, those are the contributions from our right hemisphere. So some of the older adult studies, we show that the older people, they will show very different hemispheric asymmetries compared to the young adults. So young adults, we continue to see the very clear hemispheric asymmetries, hemispheric differences in language processing. However, for elderlies, they show less hemispheric asymmetry, so that their 2 hemispheres seems doing the same thing. But some of the important thing is that some of the older adults, they are able to show young-like pattern, which means that some of the older people will show very clear hemispheric differences as young adults, but some don't. So because of this individual variations, we wonder why some of the older adults will act like a young people. So we want to know what kind of factors that could promote their efficiency in language processing, and potentially will also promote their cognitive vitality. So that's one research for the elderly. Not only study linguistic materials, the words, I also study other cognitive materials, other materials like numbers, like symbolic numbers. So I wonder whether their language abilities, because we learn language, not only spoken language, but also visual language. So whether their experience of language will impact their visual processing. So in this series of study, we look into how people processing numbers, so that we present different information. So one information is the number. So there's a pairs of numbers. So participants need to make decision whether 7 is larger in number than 2. So that's numerical processing. But there's another information that's compete here, and that's the physical size. So whether the number, a numerical number, and the physical size is congruent or incongruent. So physical size here is an irrelevant information. So I wonder whether the participants' native language experiences, whether that will impact their symbolic processing, the number processing. So the study we found here is that for people who are native in Chinese and potentially Cantonese, they will processing numbers in a faster way than the physical size. And lastly, this is a more applied research. I also use and collaborate with some educational psychologists. We try to look into what kind of digital learning materials that could promote their second language learning better and more efficiently. So that we look into their brain responses. And so this is analysis of the brain oscillation, and also compare the use of traditional CD, play the CD and just say the words, or use a more online and interactive way to learn English as a second language. So we all know that a digital platform is maybe the more efficient and more interesting, and students can learn better. We will wonder why. What's the physiological indices for this? So this is a study we have done as well. So trying to apply the EEG and ERP methods and look into the educational neuroscience field. Okay, so I talked a lot of different aspects of my research, and not for a lot of details, but I want to give you a sense that using EEG and ERPs, we could do a lot of things. We could not look into a language perspective. We also need to consider how language will impact our visual and auditory processing in our life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the very interesting research and presentation. Questions from the audience? I particularly relate to the last one on digital learning, because I have looked at kind of a gaming context, some of which is the learning context. And there's this concept of flow, which I mentioned actually very briefly in the earlier session, where flow is when you get into the deep state of absorption and you're really self-rewarding experience. So will be very interesting. I guess in this case, we connect in that maybe we could use what you have done and look at the concept of flow and how to get students or learners to get into flow so that you can enhance their learning. So I think that's very interesting. Yeah, fascinating. I have a question on event-related potential. So there's always this delay in us reacting to a stimulus. So what is the rule of thumb on what is that delay, which is the event-related potential aspects? Like how do you know in what kind of context, how much that delay is? Is there a generalized kind of a rule of thumb for us to know that?
So if you say the delay means the response is delay, right?
Yes.
So that typically we know that the brain takes time to process information. So now we know that there are very clear visual information components, so that we know around 100 to 170, the information is going through our visual cortex. Then that could be processed further. So that's the N1 component. So that's the delay. However, if you are saying the delay of how accurate that we could measure the responses, and that's a more technical problem, we need to do that in advance during the study. So we need to make sure that, oh, okay, when the stimulus is on the screen, and actually we get the information. So now the synchronization of the equipment is important.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other comment? Anyone?
What are the results you just introduced in one of your studies that you bring two concepts into one? One is larger in number, and another larger in size. What I may have missed something. So what are the inference or interference of the two?
So the interference is that here, I'm showing you the numerical task. So numerical task means the participant need to saying or indicating which number is numerically larger. So there's a competing information potentially, so that's the size. So we have three conditions here. One is congruent. Congruent means that the physical size is consistent with the numerical number. And there's an incongruent one, so that's the numerically smaller number but shows a physically larger size. And there's a neutral. Neutral is no physical information that comes in. So in the past literature, they all shows that for Westerner English speakers, they will process size at the very beginning. So the size would be facilitate the number processing. In contrast, if there's another task, so I didn't show there's another task, and that's the physical task. So regardless of the numerical number, you need to make the judgment about the physical size. So they found out that the number information will come in later. However, in Chinese studies, in using of the Chinese readers, we always see that the number processing will be going on earlier than the physical size input.
So do you use Arabic number digits or Chinese digits?
So these are the Chinese speakers. So we see that, okay, so this is the number, the size, so this is the ERPs. So the size, if the physical size will comes in to facilitate, we need to see earlier facilitation effects on the ERPs. However, we do not. We only see the number, the physical size will comes in to facilitate the processing later on. So that's an indication of the size will comes in later in the processing stream.
My last question is, whether your subjects read Chinese characters?
We don't. So we
use
ask them to
Arabic
read
digits. You use
Arabic
Arabic?
numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how? Oh, okay. You get Chinese speakers to do it.
Yes.
If you change the digit to Chinese characters.
Actually, there's a study already done that.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, using Chinese and as well as the traditional Chinese traditional number words.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Our last presenter. Our last presenter is Dr. Xie Chunyi, or Zhe. I'm learning Cantonese. Good opportunity to do that.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much for the chance for me to come here to talk about my research. I'm Chen Yuzhe. I'm from the SS department. Today, my topic for the talk is automatic change detection in human brain, its principle and application. Yes, my work is about the brain. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist. My research is about how the brain works, basically. First of all, what is automatic change detection? Let me show you my favorite commercials that happens to describe my research phenomenon very well. The phenomenon that I look at is automatic change detection. It is about how our brain can automatically detect unexpected events in the environment. It is an automatic process such that we actually don't need to pay attention to the environment, but our brain can actually pick up these changes. Typically, we said that it is P-attentive because if the change is very salient, very big, and then it will trigger our attentive process. Our brain, when it detects the change, it will automatically elicit a mismatch response, a mismatch brain response. In the EEG or the ERP literature, thank you just now, Danny, for explaining what is the ERP so that I don't need to spend time on explaining it now. In the EEG and the ERP literature, there is a specific what we call the ERP component. This is called the mismatch negativity, MMN. That is the signal, the mismatch brain signal, when the brain actually automatically detects the change in the environment. We think that this automatic illicit mismatch signal, MMN, will trigger, if it's used for triggering remedial actions like capturing our attention or triggering the attentive system to handle the change in the environment. What kind of changes can the brain automatically detect? In the past, we think that it is able to do something, to detect something very simple, like a physical change, a simple physical change in the environment. For example, for the frequency or the pitch of a auditory tone. In here, let's say the standard event, they are the low frequency tone, and the deviant events are the high frequency tone. So there's randomly, and also when there's a deviant tone with higher frequency take place, and then it will elicit the mismatch activity, the MMN. But later, we find that the system is actually, or our brain is actually very sophisticated. It can actually detect very complicated change. That is what we call the abstract changes, which is a type of violation of the pattern or the regular structure that is being shared among the standard events. For example, in here, I have the standard consisting of 3 tones with a particular pattern, the relative pitch difference. While the deviant will be a violation of this pitch pattern. So that is what we mean by the abstract change. This kind of paradigm is important from the psychologist or from the cognitive neuroscientist point of view, because it helps us to tease apart what is the actual element that can elicit the MMN by the abstract changes. To make it easier to understand, on the other side, it means that the abstract changes can be something like, for example, emotion, or cultural information that you encounter in the environment, or just now, Silway mentioned about safety in the construction site, right? Think about that. If you find a hammer misplaced in the construction site, basically the system will be able to pick it up. We also find that any objects or some is what we call the stimuli or the objects, actually, we can actually assign psychological meaning or some reward meaning to it. Let's say if you encounter a certain object, let's say money, right? The note or the bills of the money that have a rewarding value, right? So this is also part of the change that can occur in the environment and that can be captured by the detection system. My research is about this particular model called the prediction violation mechanism. This model was actually modification from a real computational model, which is the predictive coding called the predictive coding model. The whole idea is like this: how we detect changes in the environment. We are not actually just comparing stimulus across time, but actually the brain is actively seeking regularity in the environment, such that we can extract this kind of regularity structure to make prediction of the future and to detect the change. The model is like this. If we look at a sequence of events, that is a standard event, the commonality or the regularity are extracted to make a prediction model. This prediction model will be used for to expect the future event. When the future event comes in, they will have a comparison here. So it is something like a model fitting process. If it does not fit, it will elicit a prediction error. We believe that the mismatch activity, MMM, is a kind of the prediction error that can help us to trigger the remedial action, just like what we said previously, or actually it can be used to update the model. We hypothesize that that is actually two brain regions. One of it is what we call the inferior frontal cortex. So it is some place in the frontal region of the brain. And another part that is related to the generation of the mismatching activity and the prediction error, depending on the sensory modality, whether it is a sensory, whether it's the auditory or the visual, in the auditory or the visual modality, and then it would be elicited in different brain areas. For example, if it is auditory, it will be in the superior temporal cortex. If it is in the visual one, it will be in the occipital cortex. So basically, if you don't know what the two regions, I have an example in here. This is my earlier work. Actually, I use another brain imaging method that's called the optical brain imaging to look at this kind of connections. So you can see that in the frontal cortex and the sensory cortex, right? They have this blue color and the red color arrow. They actually represent a feedback mechanism between the two brain regions. That is also the part that is being specified in the computational model. Part of my work is actually to piece apart this brain dynamics actually. In the auditory domain, it is the inferior frontal cortex, and it is actually the temporal cortex, STC, labeled in here. So we can see that there's this is the signal or the activations from the frontal to the temporal and from the temporal back to the frontal activity. We want the same kind of a study on the visual modality, and we also find that there's the frontal to the occipital, that is the frontal, that is the occipital by extract. I make it bigger in here. So there's also this kind of connections from the frontal to the occipital or the visual cortex, and then back to the frontal cortex activity. Okay, that is the background of my research. So I work on something related to how the frontal cortex actually, what is the functional role of the frontal cortex in this prediction mechanism. I use different types of brain imaging methods and look at whether there is a generic frontal sensory cortex network underlying this prediction process. I also combine brain stimulation and brain imaging to look at the causal connection of the brain network. Later, we'll have a chance to look at this part a bit more detail. Today's we should talk about something about communication, right? Supposedly. That is why I try to pick up two of my study that is closer to the communication part. But I'm not looking at the semantic one. I'm looking at the something related to the communication. That is the emotion, more related to the emotion. Yeah. The first study that I will show you is about what we call the cognitive style. Oh, just now I remember in the earlier talk, some of you talk about cognitive style. Yes, right. About the eye tracking one in the earlier. Actually, I was listening to that, but although I haven't arrived yet. Yeah. So actually, I also have some work about the cognitive style, whether the cognitive style would affect this detection mechanism. The specific type of cognitive style that I look at is systemizing and empathizing style. These two styles are a little bit special because the combined effect is related to a very common phenomenon that is called autism. You probably heard about autism, this phenomenon. Yeah, well, I'll explain it a little bit more. And also for another example that I will talk about is related to language proficiency and accent. In this particular study, we combine the TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. What you say is that we give a brief pulse. This is a machine, a brain stimulator. Give a brief pulse outside. Okay, you don't need to open the skull. It is just a brief pulse, but it is strong enough to disrupt the functioning of the brain. So that we combine it with EEG. The idea is like this: if the inferior frontal cortex, the frontal cortex, it is related to the model establishment, right? Just how it is a model. If it is related to the model establishment, if I put the TMS pulse on the inferior frontal cortex, while it is processing the standard stimuli, I would be able to disrupt its function. And then at the end, what will happen? The mismatch response in the MMM response should be abolished, right? Causal effect, basically, if it happened like this. How we actually do it is that we vary the amount of the TMS applied on the standard event. So we manipulate them. In this way, the amount of information that will be allowed to for the inferior frontal cortex to establish the prediction model can be modulated. When there are too many, when there's not enough information to establish the model, and then we should be able to abolish the mismatch negativity. Again, complicated experimental design. Take-home message is that we control for many things. Okay, because to produce something that to abolish our brain response is easy. As long as you do something wrong, you can do that. So that basically the logic in here is that we need to have a lot of control condition to make sure that there's no compound. And only in the condition that we apply the TMS at the frontal cortex at a specific region, that would abolish the MMM, but not in any other control conditions. That is the logic in here. That is why we will put the TMS in different locations and we have different types of control, okay? And also we have the different cognitive conditions such that in one of the conditions, that would have the least information available for establishing the prediction model. It means that if we apply the TMS on the frontal cortex, this condition has the higher chance to have the MMM abolished. Okay, because this condition would have the least information available. Then we look at the result. These are all the very beautiful MMM in all other cognitive conditions, but only in this one, there's something special. You see the red line, there's no MMM there. It really abolished the MMM. If we apply the TMS on the inferior frontal cortex, but not in other control conditions. So basically, what we saw in here is that the IFC take a critical role in generating the MMM, especially when there's not enough information for establishing the prediction model. So through this kind of logic, we can study how this prediction model actually. Okay. Yeah, that is a concluding slide of my talk today. So I've showed you basically the major idea of my work and how I combine the brain stimulation and brain imaging methods to study this brain network. And I also showed you some work related to the communication, which is actually based on the interaction of this change detection system with the emotion processing and also the language system. This is the work from a lot of people. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, actually, I do have one here over Zoom. Do you hear? You hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay. I may not able to catch it, but can you elaborate again for the high D and low D group? How do you differentiate those two? Because I thought like for the high D, you assign for those like diagnosed with autism, but maybe I get it incorrectly.
In this study,
so how do you differentiate?
It is actually a clinical study, so that we are not using real autisms. We are just getting people with autism features. And how we identify them was actually using the AQ, the autism spectrum quotient, and also we try to quantify their processing style by the SQ and the EQ in here. Actually, we have another study using the same paradigm on real autism patients. Yes, but which is not an EEG study. And today's focus seems to be on EEG. That is why I didn't bring it in here. Yeah, that is on the optical brain imaging study. Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I think Xiaofan has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is my first time hearing about TMS. So what does it happen when you apply in TMS to people? How do people feel?
How does people feel? Okay, TMS have a lot of different types actually. The one that we are using has the lowest energy level, I would say. So basically, you will be able to feel it. It depends on the intensity. If it is very strong, actually it can be strong enough. Let's say if you apply it on your motor cortex, it can trigger your muscle movement.
It can hurt you.
Can it hurt you? If it is extremely strong, but yes, it will trigger muscle movement. But typically in our work, we won't use signal that strong, and we would titrate the intensity. Yeah, there's some procedure to titrate the intensity. And also we typically would even lower the intensity such that it won't actually hurt. And also, you won't feel much, I would say. Yeah.
But yeah, that just sounds like a typical ethical review case when
Yeah,
they will challenge you.
Yeah, actually, this procedure is if you want to know more about ethical issue, I can tell you more, because the different types actually of TMS, just like what I said, right? There's some other, like the repetitive type. They actually have clinical utilization. It means that it can change your brain. Otherwise, it won't be useful for clinical, right? But the one that we are using is non-invasive and reversible. Yes. So there are different types of the TMS application. So you need to make it very clear to the ethics committee. We are using this type and not that type. Yeah. But to be safe, we typically actually have psychiatrists helping us, collaborating with us, and then if there's anything wrong, we'll call them to help us.
How long does it take for the IRB to be approved, the Institutional Review Board?
The first one is difficult, but then after that, it's not that difficult.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I have a question on the systemizing and the empathizing, because this is really interesting, and especially it actually can explain, you know, what autism is. So my first question, I have kind of several. My first question is, where in the brain correspond? I mean, if there's you know, some locations correspond to systemizing, and how about empathizing? Like, where in the brain relates to those?
Well, in the autism work, in the other set of work, we can actually show that the brain network, this brain network, the figure that I saw in here actually, the activation pattern would be different for the people, the real autism versus the normal control. It seems that it's not just about locating a specific location, but it is the activation pattern. For example, you see that there is a signal from the frontal to the temporal to the frontal in here. But we can, when we manipulate the paradigm, actually, we can change this pattern in the normal control. Yeah, we can present them different types of change detection paradigm, and then we can modulate this pattern. We can make it just having, let's say, the frontal to the temporal, or only having the temporal to frontal pattern. In the they have different meanings. It is related to the difficulty in detecting the change. But for the ASD, we cannot see this kind of modulation pattern. They always show frontal, temporal, frontal. And this complete, this two stage or this particular pattern for the frontal, temporal, frontal one is actually means that it is the most effortful one for them to detect the change. Yeah, does it make sense? So it is not something like just the activity level of single region, but it is a pattern. Yeah, actually it fits quite well about the idea that the brain do not work region by region. It is a collaborative process between different brain regions, and they form a network to handle the connections here.
It looks like we have a question in the chat, but I have a follow-up question. So let me ask my follow-up question first, and then we will check the chat after that. So as I mentioned earlier in Dr. Huang's research, I'm interested in this concept of flow, where people are immersed in deeply absorbed in what they're doing, and it's a very self-rewarding experience. And I have been looking at some of the YouTube video that talked about what flow is, and I noticed in the comment, some people who have autism said, I am in flow all the time. You know, so that's me, I'm always in flow. So do you see, although autism is a more like a so-called trait or stable trait, and flow is more of a state. But my question here is, do you see this concept of flow to be potentially related to autism? Because especially the systematizing part, when you are in flow, you are very, you are very smooth, you are deep, you are really systemizing, I would say, you're just kind of automated. You know, what you do is automated, like when you play computer games and you're so deeply involved, everything is all automated. And then the systemizing, no, I don't think so. I think when you're in flow, you actually have no feeling. That's my feel of it. You know, although sometimes there could be, but in general, it does not necessarily need to have a feeling. It's very self-rewarding, but the self-rewarding is kind of a little bit different from emotion. That's my perspective of it.
But the emotion component, we are not talking about whether they have their own emotion or not. We are talking about their perception of other people's mind. So it is more like the whether they can interpret another person's as a person, as they have their own mind, basically. We call this the theory of mind, actually.
I see. And that further enhances the similarity between autism and flow, because obviously when you are in flow, you are in the zone, you are not even thinking of other people for sure, you know, not to mention even your surrounding, you're not even aware of what's going on.
There's actually some people, they think that it is related to the general organization about how the cognitive system or how the brain works. They think that the brain actually have two states. One of it is the rest, they call it the default mode network or the resting state. The other one is the attentional network. That is how you deal with the environment of the outside. This theory about autism is that actually they are stronger on the default mode state, or they are more into themselves. That could also explain the part that you mentioned about the flow or that in the zone issue. The brain network is different. That particular brain network is different from what we saw because this one is still related to the dealing with the outside world. That one is the inside world network.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we need to look at the chat. There might be some message or question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, message. Yeah, thanks for that. Any other question? Oh, we have more.
Related to your last question, I also want to add that is reported before the people who have autism, they have more faster visual processing related to the other humans, but just slightly faster. But my question for you, actually, your prediction model, is it linear or non-linear?
Linear, you mean the brain response is linear?
Yeah, like linear, non-linear, because
is it you mentioned about the linear, because when we talk about linearity, this issue, when we talk about this prediction model, actually it is quite complicated. And actually this year we just have a paper out that is addressing this issue about linearity. The reviewer are also asking about all kind of linear non-linear issue. It's extremely difficult to define it because very quickly why it is very difficult to define it. You can produce a paradigm that is physically the variations is linear. Whether it maps to a linear brain response, that is unknown, right? But even if, let's say, your brain response is also linear, does it really means that the system perceives the stimuli as linear? Also unknown. So that is why it is an extremely difficult question to answer, I would say. It needs to be very well defined. So the way that we can define is that we can only define by the physical world. That is linear. Then we look at the brain response, whether it's linear or not. We can only define it this way because we do not know what's beyond that.
Actually, yeah, I'm asking this question because most of the prediction model that I used to see in the literature is linear because actually this is facilitate the computation. But in practice, in real, actually non-linear is something essential for the brain to learning. So this is my question. If you have to go within one of the prediction models, so what should be trusted? What the most trusted model?
But if you think about, let's say, the prediction model, let's say the mathematical model, they are linear. But do you think that the brain response would be really linear? Because the brain response has a limit. the brain response itself, think about the energy that it can produce, let's say the neuronal signal that it can produce, there will be a part that it will plateau off. Right? So that would be a dissociation somehow. So it depends on which perspective that you are taking. Me, myself, I'm not a computation person. I'm a brain imaging person. So I would, because from my perspective, that yeah, you can have a very good model, but the issue is that at the end, the implementation is in the brain. So if the brain can show that effect, yes, I would trust the brain. So I would not, if the model fit with the brain, I would trust that, yes. Yeah.
This is very interesting discussion. Any other final comments? I know we are kind of past time, but this is so interesting and a great opportunity for us to learn from our, I guess, neuroscientists, right? Yeah, from our neuroscientists, more about brain and social science research, and also signal, I guess, processing of brain activities. Yeah, I mean, this is an excellent conclusion, or concluding presentation that wraps up the many different aspects of concepts and research that we talk about. So if there's, is there any other final question or comment? If not, we will end it here. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Just excellent. This is better than conferences that I have to travel anywhere to attend. And here we have all these local experts, in CityU. They have so much knowledge in this area. So it is really great to have this opportunity for us to learn from each of you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you for arranging the one table. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, this is a conclusion. Bye. Thank you, everyone.